Good evening. I will now call to order this special open work session at 6:31 p.m. on Thursday, September 7th. May I get an approval of the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to item 2.01, board policies GCBDA and GDBDA with Chris Holzer.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Holzer, CFO here at the Maplewood Richmond Heights School District. And before you this evening, we have our round 2 of policies GCBDA and GDBDA. Both of these policies deal with short-term leaves. The spirit behind these 2 policies is to give our employees a little bit more flexibility. In previous versions of this policy, we've had sick days and personal days, which were relatively confining for folks. So through our CBTF, they requested and have been requesting that we convert to a system that's usually found out in the professional and outside of education in those types of professions. So last month we brought to you a policy that was a bit different than what teachers were expecting. So we thought we would make good on that and come back with an updated version. I have for you here a policy comparison. If you don't mind, I'll put that up real quick.
Chris, I have it up for you.
Oh, thank you very much. So the change to this policy this month, as opposed to what you approved last month, is simply the number of days offered. So previously, teachers received 10 sick days and 2 personal days. In last month's policy, we had issued to them 10 PTO days. This time we're changing that to 12 PTO days. So a full-time school term employee, which would be a certified teacher, will receive 12 PTO days that they can use as they wish. The remainder of the policy remains unchanged, which means that they must request that time off with their immediate supervisor. Blackout days remain in place. I received a question today from a support staff member that I thought was a relevant question, relevant enough that I would bring to this meeting. The question was, what is the difference between the days between policy GCBDA and GDBDA? The difference is professional staff use GCBDA. Their days are awarded upfront at the beginning of the year. On support staff, which utilize policy GDBDA, their days are given to them monthly, with the exception of each will receive 2 PTO days at the beginning of the year. The remainder of those will come in once per month. And that is because support staff are employees at will and certified staff are contracted. So that is the difference between the 2 policies being awarded upfront at the beginning of the school year versus monthly. The number of days remains the same. One day per month of employment, plus 2 additional days for teachers. And those are the differences in the 2 policies. So we have the comparison here. After editing policies now and modifying policies for about 2 months, I've realized this is a very tedious and arduous process. So a big thanks to Dr. Jameson's administrative assistant, Kat Norton, for her assistance with this, and also MSBA. But boiling this down, this is the difference between the 2 policies before and after. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple of questions. So this policy that we're looking at tonight, where is there like a master document that sort of sets this out as this is what the teachers want? Like, how do we know that this is indeed what the teachers want? And we're not going to be back again like next month changing it?
I can respond to that, Josh. I actually implemented this year, which is something new as a part of our engagement of both staff and community meetings with the Missouri National Educator Association, then also the Missouri State Teacher Associations with the lead representatives to specifically talk about the policy here and what came out of CBTF, and also had during that meeting conversation around what we agreed upon at the end. And so the main difference to the concerns that they raised were specifically to not actually having the 12 days that were awarded. And we also discussed this with our support staff during the support staff forum. And so the information that you're seeing in the policy aligns to the minutes from the last meeting in May that took place, which indicates the continuation of the 12 days pooled as PTO days versus the delineation between personal days and also sick days.
Okay. I mean, like I said, I mean, I'm happy to, to do it. I mean, it makes sense. I'm concerned that, I mean, so this is the final regulation. This is what the regulation will look like, or is there a document that we can see that actually shows what the regulation will look like?
I can pull one up. And so MSBA actually changed how the documents are edited. So to the point of Chris saying that my assistant Kat went in, it used to be you would send the edits to MSBA, but now MSBA requires school districts within Assembly to make the actual changes. So attached to the document, you'll see the strikeouts and where the modifications are made. So for example, for this particular policy for GCBDA, under paid time off, you see the modification. So it's like 12 days, 10 days, and you'll see the shift in the information. So the new way that board docs requires it provides us the document right off. In the past, we had to send the changes to them and wait for them to send us the finalized document. So both documents are attached with the strike throughs and the changes for the board to have the ability to see the comparison.
Thank you.
I do think in the interest of transparency, it would be helpful for us as we are discussing future proposals to have the original recommendation from CBTF attached in board docs for us to review and to support our decision making.
Made a note of that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess just to complete the loop on this, I recognize that because the district is not unionized, we don't necessarily have a bargaining table where, the district, primarily board and, central office would bring proposals to the table regarding things like, benefits and personal time off, right? And have, the staff who are impacted by that have an opportunity to counter. I also recognize that, we may not always be able to grant the wishes of our staff. I suppose, the recommendation from CBTF could be to have unlimited PTO or something like that. And that's good information to have, like whatever the desires of the staff are. What I'm more concerned about is if modifications or disagreement exists, I just want the ownership from our central office to say, like, this is our proposal and we are either in line with what we think, staff want, or we're not in line with what staff want. And here's our explanation why we can't do that, or why we don't think it's a good idea, or whatever. And, again, I don't know if we had the chance to get information about unused sick time from previous years. I am not totally convinced that there won't be a cost associated with implementing this new policy. And so I think it is something that we're going to need to keep an eye on and to, potentially revisit. But I totally understand the teachers' sense that I heard in the union meetings that this felt like a reduction in benefits at in a way that they did not have transparent notice about.
And that's actually an accurate assessment. During the meeting with the two associations, I shared with them that I am in support of if they choose to unionize. And I wanted them to hear me say that because I've worked in districts that actually have collective bargaining, and there is a benefit for that. I will say, to your point, Katie, they did ask for unlimited sick days. So that ask did come through as a request, and we did talk through that and the financial costs. And Chris actually did reach out to those districts who had unlimited days and was able to receive information in regards to why those particular districts made changes. One of the things that I noted that I think would be beneficial is a list, ensuring that when we bring back these items, that we have a list of those desires that they are asking for. And I will say, coming out of CBTF, this ask I thought was a reasonable ask. And as I shared with the two union groups with whom I met, the feedback from MSBA is what then shifted the conversation. And we recognize that we do not have to take the feedback from MSBA, but that's where the switch went. And it was an easy conversation when Chris and I talked. I'm like, they get 12 days already, so give them the days that they have. We did also look at building sick use and absenteeism by building. So I do know which buildings have the highest absenteeism rate. And I also know which staff take advantage of days, particularly when you're talking about patterns. And so we have had conversations with those buildings, and we are watching those particular staff members with the understanding if we see a negative impact that we would bring this back to CBTF for modifications and then back to the board.
Are there barriers that exist in our current process that would prevent us from reviewing recommendations that come out of CBTF sooner in the summer? I think
No.
one thing that we experienced was a little bit of a rush circumstance with this to get it approved before school started. How can we change that in the future?
So I think part of it, we started off at the beginning of the process similar to what I do with support staff. And so we actually have made a modification for this year for support staff because some of the changes that come out of CBTF actually impact our support staff. So bringing those items to support staff so that they can provide feedback to administration so that as we're bringing those items forward, we can bring them to the board. I will say that it should not be a concern this year. We, with the board approving a multi-year raise and that already being identified, we do know specifically the things that we're working on. So the focus for this year, per our last notes, were around still benefits and working through our subcommittees to actually address that. So the aim is to have a recommendation to the board for first review and read by April. So that way we're not running into May and not having the opportunity, if there are adjustments, to bring that information back. And that's what I shared with the teacher union group. I said, it feels like we've done things to you because we didn't have the time over summer to bring the items back. And just good conversation. We don't want to do things to our staff. We do want to meet them where they are.
So I have another question. When we're looking at the request and approval portion of it, I'm trying to see which paragraph that is. I apologize. It's towards the end, or it says request in paragraph 1, request for approval. I still don't understand whether or not it's going to run concurrent or consecutive with FMLA. Do they have to exhaust their PTO days before they take FMLA, or are they allowed to take, like, are they taking FMLA with their PTO days, or like, how's that working?
Shonda, do you want to respond to the FMLA question?
Yes, in order for individuals to actually take FMLA, they go through a process, submitting the documentation, of course, to our office, and they have to use their time all the time, whether it's PTO. Previously, it would have been sick and vacation time. In this particular situation, since it's all PTO, they would go through the process of using all of that time first. It depends, because in MRH, we also have the leave that they can actually participate in, where if they are in the sick bank, then they can potentially use that time as well if they opted for that. And then they would go into an unpayment status. If all time has been exhausted, then they would no longer receive compensation during that time. So there's a flow chart that the staff members have, and of course go through the process and fill out the necessary paperwork. And then it lets them know the leave process. They have to use all of their available leave first, and then they're
So
eligible.
I guess, yeah, that's kind of my question though. I mean, because FMLA is unpaid. So you've got, like, let's say, they know that they've got a family emergency or something, or, I mean, there's different types of FMLA. I mean, there's the acute kind, and there's intermediate. So I'm not sure it's really clear from this policy. It certainly doesn't mention that. Is it in the, I haven't read the actual FMLA policy, but does the FMLA policy, those two should mirror each other. There should be a clear understanding that you are having to exhaust your PTO time prior to FMLA kicking in.
So
that
I think, and again, we can look into this more, Josh, but I think how we have done it in the past, even though FMLA is unpaid leave, if employees actually have leave time stored up, if they have sick time, if they have vacation time, now it's all PTO, but if they have time and they would like to utilize that time while they're out for payment, then they certainly can do so. They are required to do that before they use sick leave, and then it eventually gets into a leave without pay status. But they are allowed to have compensation, even though it's unpaid leave, if they have leave available. We do allow
right.
them to do that. So
But the
I'm
problem,
answering your question or not.
I
no,
think
not
I
really,
can
'cause-
help with that, Josh. So MSBA, with the changes that they made, and that was something that my assistant Kat looked into today. So whatever changes made to this policy, MSBA actually updates any other policy that
Correct.
touches this policy. And your specific questions for us are more procedural at the operational level. So that information is actually found in like the staff handbook and the information that they would actually get from the Human Resources Office. So it's not necessarily detailed in the policy. So they do have access to the information regarding how they access. I will say that in the teacher leader meeting, we do need to go back and visit some of that because the communication regarding the sick leave bank, which now of course becomes the PTO bank, the communication to staff knowing that that's available, how they access it, and if new staff, once they start, if they donate a day and so forth, needs to be revisited. And that's something that we talked about in the association meeting that I've had. And so I think I feel pretty comfortable about the policies that touch the changes to this policy, and also the information that's in the staff handbook, as well as the information that Dr. Ambrose Phillips provides them regarding them having to exhaust their days prior to anything else kicking in.
right. But the problem, again, that I see with this policy is that you're asking them to give 30 days notice to see if they qualify for FMLA. And I'm just thinking about if they're saying that you have to exhaust your PTO time before you go on FMLA, there's an issue. It's really what it boils down to is it's a liability issue about whether or not it becomes interference if something happens in between the time that they're using their PTO time and not protected under FMLA, because what FMLA does is it protects your job for a period of time.
Correct.
So
Can I restate something? So I think that there is a misunderstanding. So they don't have to exhaust their sick time, their leave time before they go on FMLA. We do ask for 30 days because that's the law. So we do ask, and again, we have to make sure if a staff member is going to be out for an extended period of time when you're thinking about coverage, that we have proper coverage in place. So we do ask for 30 days notice in alignment with the law, unless it's something where it's just an extenuating circumstance and they cannot give us that information because, you know, they had a medical emergency or someone in their family had a medical emergency and it was unforeseen, right? So at that time when they go out on leave, so they're on FMLA, they've already been approved. So we are not denying anyone the ability to be able to opt into an FMLA status. We're saying if you want to be compensated, then you have to use the leave in that order that I communicated previously before you then eventually, if there's not enough leave left, will go into a leave without pay status. Does that make sense?
Okay, no, that makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
Yeah, just so, right, because what I thought you had said is that you have to use your PTO time before you can apply for FMLA.
No,
and
not
like
at
that
all.
wouldn't, okay.
Most people just want to know, like, I have to go out on leave, but I also need to earn money, right? So I'm
Right.
wealthy. So they're trying to figure out how will they map this out, and our office will actually provide a calendar for them and let them know this is how much leave you have here, and show them in each area how much leave they have in each bucket, and then when they actually would go into a leave without pay status, when that is most likely to happen as well, so they can make informed decisions.
All right. Well, is there any way that we can just, I mean, like add something to it, just, you know, that this policy will be consistent with our other FMLA policies, just so that we know, so they know where to look and that there isn't any ambiguity between the policies.
So again, Josh, in board docs where, you know, the policies are all kept, there will be sub-references that will link to the FMLA policy that all get updated, as Dr. Jameson said.
And we'll also look at the ADA policy as well. Like I said, I don't see any challenges. I agree with Dr. Jameson with the way that the policy is worded that would impact the other policies, but we certainly can look at those as well.
And FMLA is a federal regulation, and as a result, there's no policy that we can put in place that would supersede that.
Absolutely.
No, I understand that, but
so
my point,
the two run concurrently. So
that, you know, I'm just looking at it as, you know, you want everything to be as consistent as possible. And so, yeah, I mean, as long as, you know, that there is reference to it, I mean, I don't really have an issue, but I would like to see, before I say yes, I mean, I guess I'd want to see everything updated.
But it wouldn't go into, so Josh, we can definitely, when we talk about the governance level and policy, what we're talking about now is the operational piece, which was kind of shared, and that will be in the handbook.
Okay, I mean, yeah, maybe I'm misunderstanding exactly
I think what we're dealing with is two separate issues. Like we want to make sure the policies are in a certain spot so that they're easily accessible. I think we all agree. But we also have to talk about making sure that the policy is what it needs to be, and approving it, which is going to be separate.
So, and
Gotcha.
Josh, the two policies before you this evening are strictly for the purposes of short-term leaves.
right.
We have other policies in place for long-term leaves. So, and due to that, you would not see FMLA regulations built into these particular policies. This particular policy.
Well,
These are strictly for short-term leaves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds about it, but that's not necessarily true. Because if somebody takes 3, you know, qualifying days off, FMLA has to be offered. So you can turn short-term leave into FMLA, or short-term leave could become an FMLA triggering event. It doesn't matter at this point, but I mean, what I'm saying is that, yeah, I guess I just wanted to see, to make sure that it is consistent with, I mean, basically what I was to backpedal a bit. I think that, you know, a couple of questions ago, the answer was made that yes, it is clear that it would run consecutively, that if you're taking FMLA, you would also be exhausting your PTO time before you got to before you got to tap into any other resource. So I think that's.
And Josh, I want to make it clear too. I want people to consult maybe with an attorney and how to do these things, because we're not advising them in this part of the process. We're just making sure that the policy is there, but how to do it right so they're protected. They need to seek counsel so they make sure they're doing it appropriately. Absolutely.
And we also, to your point, if they're out for a short term and they take 3 consecutive days, I think was the example that you also that you stated, like we will send them a letter to say and information to let them know that you may be eligible for FMLA and give them that information so they again can make an informed decision if it does turn into something longer. So I think again, the policy does not necessarily impact FMLA or ADA, which is another policy that people in the district certainly have tapped into for time off as well. So I think we have we can bring those back if you like for you to review those. But
I mean, I think that as long as we understand that, that there, yes, typically you're going to have these things be approved. Like if you're going to be out because you want to watch a series of Cardinals games, that's different than if you're having some kind of medical emergency. I could see where one wouldn't necessarily be approved by the superintendent. The other one might need to be, but that's evaluated under a different set of circumstances and a different set of rules. So yeah, I mean,
I think the other piece is Chris Hoser did his due diligence, and I know we all put eyes on it as well. And our district attorney has certainly looked at these policies as another layer to ensure that we are in alignment with not only federal law and statute, but again, in alignment with our policies and MSBA policies.
Okay.
So.
Yes, your question, Christy, that's what I was talking about. So staff, so during my meeting with the 2 associations, your question came up about, can they still donate days? The answer is yes. But what I found out through that conversation is some of the staff who have been with us for a bit didn't realize that they still had, access to the days. And so that actually surfaced. And so what we talked about is revisiting that. And then how do we communicate to staff that that's still available to them? And then the other piece is revisiting who is able to access what and what constitutes. So that's something that is on our radar to revisit and have conversation about. And I think we're on our
that doesn't need to be on our radar though. That's
No.
you all implementing.
Yes. Yes.
You.
Thank you for that, Katie. So Christy, the answer is yes.
Do we have further questions about the policy revisions? We will be voting on these tonight. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to item 2.02, the board protocols and norms.
All right, so I'm excited. This is a continuation of the work that we engaged in during our board retreat and the effort and time placed into this particular exercise by the board. And so I am going to pass it over to President Whitcomb. And if you want to guide the conversation, and I'll interject where needed.
Sure. So during our retreat on July 15th, we, off the top of our heads in brief conversation, brainstormed about some norms that we thought both that we practice and that we would like to practice as an effort to begin to document those. So we had a little subcommittee of myself, Rachel, and Christy who took those away, looked for opportunities to expand on those and introduce other concepts into our list. So that's section 2, brainstorm based on the above norms and some liberal sampling from other school districts that have already done this work. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And then we solicited feedback from one another, which is not included in this document here, but under the recommendation that we keep it to 5 norms generally. Between 4 and 6 is ideal. Look for ways to fold some of these concepts into larger buckets. And so this is the proposal that I'm presenting as a takeaway from those exercises that we went through. So if you all have had a chance to review it before this meeting, would love to get your reactions and feedback to it and thoughts about how we might further refine this. And this would be a document that would live in the board area of our website, and one that we would introduce new members to and use as sort of an annual touchstone to remind ourselves what our norms are.
President, would we also like to include this in the board's onboarding for new members as they enter into the role or position?
Yes, that would be very helpful, I think. I guess my first question would be, is there anything missing that we discussed at the retreat?
I thought it looked good, Amber. I really didn't have any suggested changes to it. I had a couple on the other document, but
Did we lose Brandy's sound?
can you not hear me? No.
Yeah.
Oh, you
Okay,
can?
yeah.
Okay.
You said
Did
there
you
were
hear
some, I think we lost you after there were some others on the other document.
Yes, there, but I'll wait till everybody's ready to go to that second document.
Yeah, and I think great job synthesizing these things. I think with this, with the protocols and with the communications pieces all being presented tonight, I think there's enough sort of overlap across some of these things that I think that making sure there's uniformity, or not necessarily uniformity, but just consistency across documents is going to be really important. And I'm finding myself just not totally certain. And so we probably need a sentence here about like what differentiates our norms from our protocols, from our communications plan too. And
I had a similar reaction after delving into the protocols over the past couple of days and realizing there's duplication between these two efforts. So I think we need probably one more editorial pass and some framing language that helps us understand what norms are and how they're different from protocols, and link those two things together more purposefully.
And if it would be helpful, I could provide some information or additional guidance to the board around the difference between the two.
Can we go to protocols really quick?
Absolutely.
yeah, and the protocols document is much more of a work in progress here. I am not sure if everyone, when exactly everyone got access to this Google Doc. Obviously, there is a lot of just comment and, cleanup of some of it, making it more MRH-y than we got another district's version. And so obviously there's plenty to borrow, but a variety of things that needed to be, tailored for us.
Yes. So the two suggestions that I had are really minor, but I think impactful. So if you look on page 10, Benita, like the very first box. Yeah, right there where it says board members will. Earlier in the document, it refers to board members must, which I really liked the wording of that. I felt like it should be kind of consistent. So we should either put must here or change both to, or have both be will, but I like must, I think. So like I said, very minor, but that kind of stood out to me. And then I had a question for everyone about, if you'll go to page 12, about the 72-hour, response time, which we all agree 72 hours. But then I got concerned about, for example, this past Monday was a holiday. So what if there's a message that comes out on a Friday before a Monday holiday? Theoretically, we'd have to respond on the holiday to come within, or at least be working on it, right? To get a response out with 72 hours. But I think on days where we're not dealing with that particular dynamic, 72 hours is plenty of time. So what if we put some caveat in there, not to include weekends or holidays, or just some language that makes it clear that it's 72 hours of working time, not just 72. I don't know what you guys think about that, but that was specifically because we just had the holiday, that was something I was thinking about.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
know.
all.
And I know we were just in policy world too, and that we have multiple legal brains on this. So, I mean, Brandy, I totally see the nuance in a will versus must, sort of thing. And again, these are our practices that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to. And you know what? If we respond within 96 hours over a holiday weekend sometime, and somebody wants to be like, well, your protocol says, well, okay, these are the best, expectations that we're holding ourselves to. This isn't like, board policy that says like, this must happen, this must happen, this must happen. So yes, I appreciate, I also think we're setting a very high bar for ourselves with the 72-hour response time. And I think it's an aspiration that we're holding ourselves to, which we may not always meet. And again, because this is not policy, we may not always meet it, and that's okay.
I don't know that it's always apparent to our community that because these are volunteer roles that we inhabit, that we actually do use our weekends to work. So I appreciate that I have 72 hours after public comment, because that gives me the weekend to respond, because I have a job during the week and I don't have time to do that. But maybe 3 business days might be a better way to approach it, which would build in a little bit more cushion if we receive a communication on a Friday. Something to think about.
Again, because these are our aspirations for us, I think that makes total sense to give ourselves that level of reality check, and that we certainly can exceed those expectations.
Are we ready to maybe remove some stuff from this document, since it's kind of difficult to truly, at least for me, process with the strikeouts and the different colors and the highlights and the other things that are highlighted, and I don't know what the difference between the blue highlights and the pink highlights. Are we ready to start making decisions and making it more? I mean, I feel like I am. If I'm going to be able to read it and make any more suggestions, I want to get rid of stuff that anybody on this board has said, I don't like this, then let's get rid of it and get down to the section of it that at least people want to have a connection to.
Might I suggest that maybe we start from the top, and since I'm actually in the document, I can either make the changes as we go through, so that way we can go through each of them. Because I know I wrote down the notes that were suggested by Brandy for page 10, the conversation around board members must or will, and then also modifying the language for page 12 from 72 hours to 3 business days. But if it's okay, I can start from the top and then kind of work my way down as we go through.
I worry that might be a little time consuming and granular. Could
Okay.
we could we perhaps ask everyone to commit to reviewing and providing comments by a certain deadline on this so that we can accept all the changes and then work with a finalized draft in our next phase? Would that be appropriate?
I think that would be a good idea.
Can we give everyone 72 hours or 3 business days?
Other than that,
So by end of the day, what? Tuesday?
um,
So you got Friday, Monday, Tuesday as our 3 business days? Yeah.
the
Okay.
Tuesday I'll be out for. a
Well, you have
medical-
all weekend too to do your unpaid work here as a volunteer board member.
So I will be being prepared to not work for a month starting Tuesday. I love you all. This is very important work. That is what I'll be doing this weekend. I will try to, try to have it done by Monday though. I will try my very
And
best.
whatever you don't get done, Brandy, we got you.
Yeah.
Board members are allowed some leave too.
It's actually in better hands with you guys anyway.
Yeah, I think again, that will also potentially allow some time for some, synthesizing across the documents that we're reviewing tonight too. I do, there are some actual honest questions that I did put in here. I do tend to be extra with my Google Doc stuff. So yeah, all the like grammatical and, Amber giving us only 1 space after a period reminders are fine to be approved. But I think there are some actual questions that we do need to discuss in this document. So please look for those.
Yeah, and respond in the document. That's always helpful. Okay, well, I will send a reminder to everyone on Sunday to nudge you to take a look if you haven't already. Okay, no further discussion on that. We'll move on to 2.03, our board engagement plan proposal.
All right. So just want to take us back a bit to the June 15th board meeting, where based on the feedback from community for the survey, we discussed and presented information regarding what community engagement could look like for MRH and for our board members, and also outline what we currently do, in addition to what we needed to add in order to continue the conversations around the work. As always, I like to attach an article. This information regarding the characteristics of effective boards is not new to our board. We frequently discuss these items. We frequently discuss data, and we frequently discuss how the board shows up as it relates to the business that takes place daily. One of the things I did want to point out is the section where it discussed effective boards engagement in the community and then looking for ways to institutionalize it. And that's the piece that I wanted to pull out. And that's what this document hopefully will do for our community. So I took the liberty of really thinking about the connection or the nexus between board policy BDDH, which spawned the conversation around what does community engagement look like, specifically to members of our community adding items to the board agenda. And out of that, we were able to survey our families to get feedback regarding what they felt they would like to see and the things or concerns that they had in relation to this particular policy, which was BDDH. So I just made a note of how we got feedback and then also some of the feedback that was received as it related to information provided from our teacher union reps and other individuals within the community. So I did provide a rationale. I think it's important for us to talk about some of these things. So what is the purpose of community engagement for the board? And you can see they're identified: improving communication, strengthening accountability, enhancing decision-making, promoting transparency where possible. And I say that because some of the things that are discussed occur in executive session and not necessarily is item or information that can be shared with the community. Then also the bigger piece for me is fostering community support. So a lot of the messaging this year, as we talk about the rollout of our strategic plan, aligns to the piece around community engagement as well. The last piece you will see just kind of addressing the unique needs of the district. We recognize that as we continue to look at data and those gaps become present, we have to make decisions that will support in improving those areas over time. So thank you for the feedback to the document regarding some of the language as I attempted to create the first draft. So again, if the format is not a format that you feel is easily accessible, please feel free to give me feedback on that and I can make adjustments. But I went through and outlined several things. I crosswalked information from our first session. So if you recall, on June 15th, I showed a slide that indicated like this particular form of engagement is to inform. Examples of that were board briefs, the board's webpage, which is currently under revision to ensure that it's more accessible to our families. And then also I talked about those engagement activities that were considered consulting or collaborating. So as I included the items in this document, I actually captured those pieces so that our community could see the crosswalk so that they are familiar with what these particular items give them I guess, an opportunity to engage at a varying level, but then also giving them an opportunity to see what exactly the board is doing over time. And so I wanted to pull out a couple that are new. So I won't read the full document, but the pieces that are already there and being implemented. So again, I talked about policy BDDH. Our public currently has the opportunity to actually come to the board meeting to present public comments. They also can send emails to board members. And we talked, I think I heard Katie talk about the connection to the protocols, meaning like, for example, responding in one voice. So you'll see the overlay here showing up about that, so the community can email and do some of those things as well. So you'll see information included around the strategic plan committees and their ability to have a role on that. Once we come back with the committees, and then also the purpose and the rationale, as well as outlining for our community, as Josh pointed out in our last meeting, conversation around what is their role and being clear about like where the decision lies within those committees. So that information will come forward. A few that I want to point out that are new, you will find that it's also included because our stakeholders, i.e. our teachers, are considered a part of our community. I did add to this particular engagement plan, the board's participation in the association meetings at the beginning of the year and being void of the superintendent. So the board starting this year, attending alongside those association reps to hear and address our staff and have that conversation back and forth. The other piece that I would like to spend some time discussing is the addition of adding liaisons to the actual schools. And I did put some language there to provide some direct point of contact for our schools, but also enhancing that communication and advocacy for school-specific issues. And the other piece of that is ensuring that the board members can actually have an opportunity to walk the spaces that where teachers, while school is in session. So that was a conversation that was had. And it also gives an opportunity for the board to see the items that are being approved in their in action in the building. So for example, if a board member were to walk, let's just say the elementary school, and they saw teachers during their morning meeting time, and this is also taking place at the ECC for Second Steps, well, the board approved the purchase of Second Steps, and you would be able to see that hands-on, and then also see the type of questions that potentially I'm asking as I'm doing those particular walks. So I am going to pause. I did put 2 points of evaluation. So as we talk about continuous improvement and keeping in mind the cross-section to MSIP 6, which is a part of the board's leadership goal through MSIP 6, we do want to evaluate not only the activities that are listed here, but then also whether or not this particular plan is providing the board the access to the community so that we can engage in a manner that's going to be impactful as we move forward for making decisions. So I did include some evaluation pieces there for consideration. Are there questions currently about the format, the content, items that are missing from our previous meeting?
Yes, since you just talked about evaluation, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit there. The last section that says plan evaluation and revision, the board will review the plan annually. That makes sense. The plan may be revisited more frequently. Great, that makes sense. The activity evaluation, I'm not sure I understand what this sentence means and what the goal against which we're evaluating the activities is.
Great question. Thank you for asking. So for example, I'm just gonna pick one. So I'll pick, the board will survey the community to collect feedback on district priorities, goals, and needs. So that for me is an activity that's included in the engagement plan. So under the Plan, Do, Study, Act, and a real-time example of that would be the climate and culture survey. So if we're doing a Plan, Do, Study, Act, the action part of that process that we're engaging in now is to change the actual survey that's being used. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're changing the actual engagement plan. It's saying that an activity that's included there, if the board were to say, is this meeting the needs of our community, we then evaluate just that activity, not necessarily the full plan. So I was trying to delineate when developing it an opportunity just to address an item as an activity versus looking at the full plan, because the plan may very well be a good plan, but we may find that some of the things that we thought were actually beneficial, and then it would be the responsibility of myself and my administration to provide the board with data that shows whether or not it's working or not. And so if, for example, like one of the ones that was added for the town hall meeting, and that's a newly added, or the community conversations are a newly added item that will happen twice a year, and say the first event participation is 10 people and the second event we have 5, that particular activity could be evaluated under this continuous process of improvement to determine whether or not that particular activity, if it's beneficial, and if it's not beneficial, then we would come back to the drawing board to say, how else might we be able to engage community? So versus doing a full community conversation, we may do individual school conversations, which may have additional buy-in. So that was my attempt to give us an opportunity to look at the activities included in the plan, but also having space to evaluate the actual plan as a whole. So hopefully that makes sense.
Do you imagine that those are concurrent processes, that those 2 evaluations are actually happening at the same time? There's one evaluation form that allows us to give feedback on the individual events, and also then serves as our plan evaluation instrument.
Yes. And so for me, one of the things that I hope to bring back is how will we collect data for these events? And so what will be the metrics? So will it be a survey saying that you felt your voice was heard and there's a level of engagement? Are we looking at the number of individuals that actually participate? So we would have to determine whether or not the particular activity, what that metric would be. So as we're looking at that along the way, to your point about being consecutive, because what I don't want to have happen is that we get to the end of the year when it's time to actually look at the plan again to see if we want to subtract items off or add, that we already know that something's not working. So if the first event is not necessarily meeting the needs and we survey, do we want to offer the event the same way? So it gives us flexibility to be able to quickly pivot and make changes because we see that it's not working. So I do see them going as, you know, you're collecting data along the way, and at the end, being able to modify the plan to bring back for the next school year.
Can you talk a little bit about how we might operationalize the individual school liaison arrangement? I know other school districts do this. I've struggled a little bit to understand what that looks like in a way that does not create sort of inappropriate channels of communication that would violate our protocols.
So for me, it's more or less when I think about the activities, I am encouraged by the participation of our board. Frequently, you see our board members at the events, whether they're school-based events, but also district-level events, and that can be taxing because, as was stated, our board members do work full-time jobs, and so the goal would be to have individuals assigned. So say, for example, if the ECC is having popsicles in the park or their picnic that's coming up, those particular board members would actually be assigned to that particular school. So the goal is to kind of give the board members an opportunity to learn each of the schools, and we would then rotate each year. So my principals are very familiar with what the communication channels are for the board, but it's really to give them a point of access, as kind of indicated there. And then the other piece for me, I think that it allows some time. So if a board member can't make it and there are two people assigned to a particular school, then one person might be able to go and the other not. So that's what I was thinking for that. In regards to the selection process, what I have observed in another district is that the board members engaged in conversation to say where they thought that they would be best suited. And so I was hoping that we can have some conversation to see where board members would like to be assigned for this year, and then we will revisit that again next year. And if there are specific things that you would like for me to codify in regards to the interactions and what should take place between the school as a liaison, we can discuss that, and I can bring something back as well.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think it's helpful for us to have expectations then around how many events and where we might be attending them, since there are so many that we have an opportunity to participate in.
On that note, can you talk a little bit more about the office hours for board and what that looks like?
So this was one of the conversations, I think we threw it out, and Amber, I may need your help with this. It was like, come and pop in and talk to, a board member during coffee hours. So nothing that was like every week, every month. I didn't know if this was one that we wanted to keep, but because I had it in my notes as an item, I included it, but I can remove it. And I think it offered, from my understanding, if a community member wanted to have a one-on-one, they could just drop in.
I want to be mindful of our ability to sustain this level of engagement. That said, as board president, I'm probably having 3 to 4 one-on-one coffee meetings or 2-on-1, 2-on-2 on a monthly basis already. So for me personally, this can focus that activity a little bit more effectively. It does create a venue for those who maybe have given feedback in one way, say signing a letter, but haven't offered any additional feedback in that realm, to have a personal conversation with a board member to learn more and to allow us to learn more from them and gain their perspective. I do think this would be one that we would want to assess pretty rigorously at the end of the year to determine whether this is a need or a perceived need. I'm not entirely certain of that, but I do think making it available for more focused conversations is appealing to me personally. But I can't speak for anybody else on that.
I can appreciate that, and that makes perfect sense. I'm trying to, I think, operationalize it and make it concrete of, is it going to be, when I think of office hours, I think of professor office hours, where you set aside an hour or two in a certain location every week at this time? Is that what we're envisioning? Because I know that the meetings that I've had with community members, it's been not necessarily at the same place, not at the same time, it's been all over the community, outside the community. So I'm just curious what we're thinking.
Yeah, that's interesting, Rachel. I think especially because we haven't had a venue previously. I mean, I could imagine that maybe the location and time rotate, like maybe once a quarter, it's like the hour before a board meeting. And, you know, if anybody reaches out during that month to say like, I'd like to, you know, talk about this issue, we can say, well, one or two board members will be available for the hour before the board meeting. Or, you know, once a quarter, it's on a Saturday at 10 a.m. at a coffee shop or something like that. But yeah, I do hear you in that, because we haven't had a specific, like, you know, defined space. It's been, you know, here, there, everywhere. And
I kind of like that, the variety, because, you know, I feel kind of like too, you don't want to alienate anyone, because some people do work during the day, and then some people maybe work weekends and have days off. You know, it's just different for everybody. And to try to get as many community members involved as possible, being able to be flexible about the times and the days and where they are, I think is helpful.
The schedule we're gonna put together that everyone could sign up, since we're talking about different places, venues, times, to kind of meet everyone's schedule. So how we will actually put this together so it won't be the same ones continue to go on. Because I know some community stakeholders like reaching out to certain board members. So how will we really strategize and put this together?
Yeah, and so now that we're talking about that, my fear is that because our schedules are so crazy, are we really creating a ton of work for whoever's trying to coordinate now these schedules, or people that are more flexible?
Where'd you go, Brandy?
You know?
We lost you after flexible.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I don't know what's going on. But maybe my system's telling me to mute. But I was thinking about just how difficult that might be for someone to coordinate. And then also, because some of us have more flexible schedules than others, my fear would be that those who can do it, everything kind of falls on them more. And then the schedules may be a little more hectic, aren't carrying as much of the load as they could. Just because there's not that flexibility. So I don't know. I think maybe we want to think about that. I like the idea for sure. But I think maybe with us coordinating our own schedules and when we can meet with people, that kind of thus far.
I agree with all of it, but I hadn't thought about it the way that Katie had said it. And I'm curious if that might make it easier. Because first of all, I don't think anyone should be coordinating it. There's enough coordination going on. I'm curious if there were to be an hour before something where we just say, hey, who's got an hour before this event that they're willing to sit, and just we police ourselves and say, well, I haven't done it yet, so I can do it on this day or whatever. I'm curious about that. In my head, I seriously was thinking Lucy from the Peanuts and the little tent sitting behind it, waiting for 2 hours for no one to show up and chat with us. And so I thought, well, gosh, I don't know how, but to have a particular time and place that becomes, and it could be, there's a particular night each month, there's a particular morning each month, just like we do everything else. You know, we have a board meeting the third Thursday of every month. So maybe the second Saturday is a 10 a.m. meeting and the third Thursday is a 5:30 open, whatever, and it just becomes a norm. And
You
as
could also do signups, like what we do with the board meetings where somebody, you know, like maybe you have certain days that you offer this quote unquote service, and then people could sign up if they wanted to speak, you know.
yeah,
I think even if nobody shows up, if there are two of us there, that's time that we have together, which is always a nice thing too. We don't have as much of a sort of consistent meeting rotation among us as individual board members. We have our mentoring groups, but outside of that, we don't have as much consistency there.
right. I'm a little bit, I'm cognizant of where, because it goes two ways for me. One is you want it to be a comfortable place that community is willing to come talk. You want it to be, you want to be able to hear, you want to be able to listen, but you don't want it to feel like it's in a closed off space. And then we want it to be clear of what our role is, that yes, we're here to listen, but there's going to be a limit to the level of transparency and what we can do during. I want to be very clear about what the purpose of the meeting is. And I'm not sure I'm being that clear about it right now.
Yeah, I just sitting here and listen to everyone talk. When I was at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and one of my role was to build a relationship with the police officers, I would find out where those different municipalities was hosting coffee with a cop, and I will pop up at different coffee shops they may be at, McDonald's, and it would be consistent every month. Like Creve Coeur will always be at McDonald's on Olive once a month, and I will go out there and talk to them. St. Louis County will be showing up in Afton. I will go out there, but that's what I'm just kind of envisioning, like once a month, if the community know we might be at this coffee shop in Maplewood or Richmond Heights, or maybe evening time over here in the park. I mean, just something where it has to be consistent. And I can't speak for anyone else's schedule. That's the way I have to roll. That's the way I have to do it. It's one of those ones where it's like, you know, pop-ups don't work well for me. It's something I know I have to do and put it on my schedule and be consistent with it. So that's my only concern for me, because I want to, you know, do my share and participate, and I feel like the load is falling on others, and everyone has a busy schedule.
Dr. Jameson, what is the timeline on this community engagement plan? Where are we in the process? This is a first read. This is a first discussion. What are you looking for?
So this item actually doesn't need to be voted on. The board has to come to consensus in regards to what's included here. And a lot of this plan, the board is already doing these things. So that's what is most exciting for me, is that it's not new things. It is just something that makes transparent for our community that these are the varying ways that the board can and are engaging. And with the exception of the few items that I lifted out, everything else the board has already been doing. So it's already taking place. For me, as Amber indicated, the goal would be to have this information included on the board's website. And then we also can include it in the library section on Assembly. so that if a community member wanted to go in and look in the library and see it, they could also access it there. But a lot of it is really just kind of firming up, I think, to the question whether or not we want to have something consistent. So if one is interested in having a Saturday at the same time, or having the option of doing an hour before the board meeting, we could actually identify a location, whether it's in Maplewood or Richmond Heights, and then assess. And I think I heard either Amber or Katie talk about really looking to see if this is something that's going to be beneficial. And that kind of goes back to the piece that I talked about around the activity evaluation. So if in fact we include this item in the engagement plan and the board says, well, we don't have any participants showing up, then that may be one that we don't want to consider including as we evaluate the plan at the end of the year.
Would we consider requesting feedback from individual board members on their preferences for once a month in a fixed location versus twice a month in two separate locations at two different days of the week? Maybe put together just a little bit of a feedback mechanism so we can all capture not only what our desires are, but what our availability might be. Would that make sense?
So I jotted down some notes. We can assist with that. So CAT can actually develop a quick survey that includes the days of the week and a variety of times, and some locations that are included in either in both Maplewood and Richmond Heights, and then give an option for other if that would be helpful to the board.
And I think for if we do choose to do one, say prior to a board meeting, just having the other side of the R&D available to us if we come early. I don't think we need to make that a separate space. And then eventually when we have a new central office building, that would be a great location to facilitate that.
It actually will be, because we have these smaller mini conference rooms that the board can actually access in the new space. So super excited about that. Other questions or thoughts? Is the format okay? If there are no other questions, that's all I have for this particular item. And for action steps, what I've noted is to develop a survey to capture the board's preference for availability, days of the week, locations. We will also include the R&D as a location as well. And I think I had what I captured for this document. And then also to, are there preferences for where the board members would like to liaise? So as we talk about assignments, this is a great time, or I can add that into the survey as well. Would you prefer it be included in the survey?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And,
Yes.
and do you have recommendations for whether or not that school should be the school that our kids attend? I'm thinking that I'm already going to be going to some high school events. So does that mean I should pick another school so that I can build relationships and be present in other campuses?
So that was something that when I observed this conversation take place in another district, that was the conversation, and the suggestion there was for board members to select a school where their kids did not attend, because they felt like that it could potentially cause a conflict. So I'm open. I have worked with the majority of the board for the last 2 years, so I'm not particularly concerned about that. But I do think that there is an opportunity for board members to liaise in buildings where they do not have much exposure outside of the day-to-day when we have those activities. Because I also think that some of the things that we hear are very perceptual, and that will give the board an opportunity to be in those spaces to observe and see for themselves whether or not those things are actually true indicators for success or not in those particular buildings. And I do think the relationship piece is critical. So I personally don't have a preference, but for that particular observation, when I saw this activity take place, that was one of the things that was discussed, encouraging board members to select sites where their children are not present.
Good. Okay, thanks for that. We'll add that to the survey. Other questions or feedback before we move on? Thank you, Dr. Jameson, for documenting all of this. There was a lot that came forward from each individual board member, so it's great to see this distilled and consolidated.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to item 3.01, our action item to approve policies GCBDA and GDBDA. I can get a motion to approve.
Move to approve policy GCBDA and GDBDA as presented.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Policies are approved. I get a motion to enter executive session.
I move to enter executive session in accordance with section 610.021, subsection 3, 9, and 13, and section 610.022 of the revised status of Missouri on September 7, 2023 for the following Pacific Region personnel matters.
Second.
Roll call vote?
Ms. Herndon Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Martinez,
Yes.
Ms. Goldsman,
Yes.
Ms. Kaufman,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Ms. Withicum.
Yes. Regular session is adjourned at 7:47 p.m. The executive session meeting link is in board docs. See you all in a minute.